The morning sun glinted off the cherry red Lamborghini Aventador blocking my ranch gate. I stood there, coffee mug in hand, staring at the $75,000 obstacle preventing me from accessing my own property. The engine rumble that echoed across my 40-acre ranch wasn't coming from that Italian sports car, though. No, it was coming from my 1968 M60 patent tank, fully restored and street legal, rolling steadily toward the gate from her lawn chair positioned strategically on the public road. Veronica Pettin, our neighborhood self-appointed HOA dictator, jumped to her feet. Her designer sunglasses slipped down her nose as her mouth fell open in shock. The scream that followed could have shattered windows 3 blocks away. Let me back up a bit. My name's Jake Sullivan and I'm a RETIRED Army engineer who spent 25 years working on military vehicles. After my discharge, I bought this beautiful ranch property just outside the Meadowbrook Estate subdivision. Keyword there being outside my land isn't part of their precious HOA, a fact that has driven Veronica absolutely insane for the past 3 years. I keep to myself, mostly spending my days restoring old military vehicles. In my workshop, the tank was my pride and joy, a decommissioned beauty I'd spent 2 years bringing back to life. Every permit filed, every inspection passed, every legal requirement met. She was roadworthy and registered, though I rarely took her out except for the occasional Veterans Parade. Veronica had other ideas about what constituted appropriate property use. Despite having zero authority over my land, she'd made it her personal mission to bring me into compliance with what she called community standards. It started with passive-aggressive notes tucked under my windshield wipers whenever I drove into town, official-looking documents with mad-up violation codes and fabricated fines. Then came the escalation. She filed complaints with the county about noise violations that didn't exist. She tried to get my property rationed through some backdoor meetings with her cousin on the planning commission. When that failed, she attempted to expand the HOA boundaries to include my ranch, which the other homeowners voted down 47-3. The cone incident was particularly memorable. I came home one afternoon to find bright orange traffic cones blocking my driveway, along with a handwritten sign declaring it a no parking zone. The sheriff's deputy who responded to my call couldn't stop laughing when he saw Veronica's signature at the bottom of her homemade ordinance, but blocking my gate with her Lamborghini while claiming she was enforcing a beautification order. That was a new level of entitled delusion even for her. I'd called the sheriff's office. Of course, Deputy Morrison said he was tied up with a multi-car accident on Highway 12 and it could be hours before anyone could respond to a non-emergency parking dispute. The problem was I had 300 head of cattle that needed to rotate to the south pasture and a feed delivery scheduled for noon. Veronica knew this. She'd been stalking my property long enough to memorize my routines. This was calculated harassment, plain and simple. I walked back to the workshop, pasted my collection of restored military vehicles, the deuce and a half truck, the armored personnel carrier, and there she sat, my M6070, tons of American steel and determination. I ran my hand along her hull, feeling the smooth paint job I'd spent weeks perfecting. 20 minutes later, I was rumbling down my private road toward the gate. The tank's tracks crushed gravel beneath them with a satisfying crunch. Through the periscope I could see Veronica frantically waving her arms, her mouth moving in what I assumed were threats I couldn't hear over the engine. The Lamborghini looked even more ridiculous from this angle, its low-profile sports car frame dwarfed by the tank's massive hull. I engaged the forward gear, moving at a careful 2 miles per hour. No rush, no anger, just calm, methodical problem. Solving the first contact was almost gentle. The tank's front hull kissed the Lamborghini's rear bumper, and I watched through the periscope as the car's alarm system activated, lights flashing, horn blaring, adding to the symphony of chaos. Veronica was now jumping up and down, her phone out, recording everything. I continued forward, the Lamborghini's rear end compressed like an aluminum can, the trunk folding in on itself. The car tried to resist, its parking brake engaged, but against 70 tons of tank it might as well have been made of paper. Or match the vehicle scraped forward across the asphalt, leaving parallel grooves in the road surface. By now neighbors had emerged from their houses. I recognized Tom and Betty Morrison from 2 doors down there, mouths hanging open. Young Tyler Bennett was live streaming on his phone, narrating the scene with the enthusiasm of a sports commentator. Even cranky old Mr. Fitzgerald had wheeled himself out onto his porch, a rare smile creasing his withered face. The Lamborghini's alarm cut out abruptly as I reached the halfway point. The rear wheels had lifted off the ground, the car's frame bending at an unnatural angle. The beautiful red paint job was now decorated with scratches and gouges. One of the side mirrors had popped off entirely, bouncing across the road like an expensive hockey puck. I paused for a moment, checking my clearance. Almost there, just needed to push through another few feet to clear the gate entirely. Veronica had abandoned her filming and was now pounding on the tank's hull with her fists, accomplishing nothing except bruising her manicured hands. The final push was the most satisfying. The Lamborghini's front end lifted as the tank's weight transferred, and the entire vehicle pivoted sideways, clearing the gate entrance with a grinding screech of metal on metal. I reversed slightly, centering the tank, then shut down the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. I climbed out of the commander's hatch, stretching my back. As I surveyed the scene, the Lamborghini looked like it had gone 10 rounds with a trash compactor, still recognizable but definitely not driving anywhere soon. My gate was clear, and already I could see my ranch hands bringing the cattle up from the lower field. Veronica's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. She stood there, mouth opening and closing like a beached fish, seemingly unable to form words. I walked past her to inspect the damage to the road, making mental notes for the repair crew I'd need to call. Deputy Morrison arrived 45 minutes later, just as the feed truck was pulling through my now accessible gate. He stepped out of his cruiser, took one look at the scene, and let out a long whistle. Veronica immediately launched into a tirade, demanding I be arrested for destruction of property, reckless endangerment, and about 6 other charges she seemed to be making up on the spot. The deputy held up a hand, silencing her. Mid-rant, he walked around the crumpled Lamborghini, taking photos and making notes. Then he came over to where I was leaning against my fence, sipping a fresh cup of coffee. His first question was whether the tank was street legal. I showed him the registration, the insurance documents, and the special permits required for tracked vehicles on public roads. He nodded, made more notes, then asked about the situation leading up to the incident. I explained about the blocked gate, the cattle needing to move, and the feed delivery. I showed him my phone with the call log proving I'd contacted the sheriff's office first. Several neighbors had wandered over by this point, and they began chiming in with their own stories about Veronica's harassment and abuse of her HOA position. Tom Morrison mentioned the time she tried to find him for having the wrong shade of beige on his mailbox. Betty talked about the measuring tape incident, where Veronica had trespassed to measure grass height at 6 o'clock in the morning. Tyler Bennett's mom shared screenshots of threatening emails about their son's bicycle being left in their own driveway for more than 30 minutes. The deputy's expression grew more serious with each story. He walked back to Veronica, who was on her phone with what sounded like her lawyer, judging by the legal threats she was spouting. When she finally paused for breath, he informed her that she was being cited for obstructing a private roadway, trespassing, and harassment. The explosion that followed was truly spectacular. Veronica went from purple to red to a concerning pale white in the span of 30 seconds. She demanded to speak to the sheriff personally. She threatened to sue the entire department. She named dropped every supposedly important person she knew, which turned out to be surprisingly few. The deputy remained calm throughout, writing out the citations with methodical precision. When she refused to sign them, he simply noted her refusal and handed her the copies anyway. Then he turned to me and confirmed that I was within my rights to clear my own property of obstructions, though he recommended using less dramatic methods in the future. The tow truck that arrived to collect the Lamborghini needed special equipment to deal with the extensive damage. As they winched the crumpled luxury car onto the flatbed, Veronica stood on the sidewalk, alternating between taking photos and making phone calls. I heard the word lawsuit at least 15 times. True to her word, she did sue her attorney. A sharp-dressed man named Richardson filed a claim for the full value of the Lamborghini plus emotional distress, lost wages from missing work to deal with the situation, and something called diminished life enjoyment. The total came to just over $400,000. My attorney, a former JAG officer named Sarah Chan, whom I'd known since my army days, seemed almost gleeful when she received the lawsuit. She immediately countersued for harassment, trespassing, false imprisonment since I couldn't leave my property, and interference with agricultural operations. She also filed a motion for summary judgment based on the police report and witness statements. The HOA board, meanwhile, had called an emergency meeting. Apparently, the tank incident had emboldened numerous homeowners who'd been suffering under Veronica's reign of terror. A petition for her removal had gathered over 60 signatures in less than a week. The board meeting was standing room only, with neighbors lined up to share their grievances. I attended as a courtesy to my neighbors, even though I wasn't part of the HOA. The stories that came out were shocking. Veronica had been skimming HOA funds to pay for her personal landscaping. She'd been accepting bribes from certain contractors in exchange for exclusive maintenance contracts. She'd even tried to foreclose on an elderly couple's home over fabricated violations. While they were dealing with medical issues, the vote to remove her was unanimous, minus Veronica's own vote. She stood up, gathering her papers with shaking hands, and declared that we'd all regret this, that she had connections, that she'd make our lives miserable. But the bravado was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. The civil trial happened 6 months later. Sarah had done her homework, presenting a detailed timeline of Veronica's harassment, not just toward me but toward dozens of neighbors. The judge seemed particularly interested in the pattern of behavior, the abuse of power, and the deliberate blocking of my gate. After being informed about the cattle and delivery, Veronica's attorney tried to argue that the response was disproportionate to the offense, that no reasonable person would use a tank to move a car. The judge countered by asking, what reasonable person would block someone's gate with a luxury car to enforce non-existent authority? When the verdict came down, it was devastating. For Veronica, not only was her lawsuit dismissed, but she was ordered to pay my legal fees plus damages for the harassment. The total came to $180,000. Additionally, she was hit with criminal charges for the financial crimes discovered during the HOA investigation. The criminal trial was shorter but no less dramatic. The forensic accountant testified about the embezzled funds. Former board members revealed the intimidation tactics she'd used to maintain control. The contractor kickback scheme alone was worth $50,000 over 3 years. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison to suspended plus 5 years of probation. She was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which came to another $75,000. As the bailiff prepared to take her into custody, Veronica turned to look at the packed courtroom. The imperious HOA president was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed woman who'd lost everything. Her designer clothes looked suddenly cheap, her perfect makeup cracked. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed its shoulders, slumping in defeat as the handcuffs clicked into place.